Okay, so I'm sure most of us have seen Van Gogh's Starry Night at some point, right? I mean, it's kind of an iconic image. You see those blues and yellows, all those swirls, and like you can practically feel the energy coming off the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
It's really emotional. And that actually ties into what we're talking about today because our source material brings up this point. Like, have you ever thought that maybe what you're seeing there is more than just an expression of Van Gogh's, feelings and emotions? What if you accidentally stumbled onto something like fundamental about how the universe works? Pretty wild idea, huh?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question, right? And the article we're looking at today, it's called Did Van Gogh Paint the Motion of the Universe? It was written by Dave Champagne and Zero One ChatGPT. And basically, they try to explore this idea that those swirls and everything, they're not just like artistic choices. They might actually reflect some deeper principle of the cosmos.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. Like, how could Van Gogh's style, his way of painting, how could that possibly line up with the way the universe actually works?
All right, so let's just start with that first impression you get when you look at Starry Night. I mean, you see all this movement, this energy. Those swirls are so powerful, almost like a reflection of some inner turmoil being expressed on the canvas.
Yeah, the brushstrokes, like they have so much life and energy to them. It's really dynamic. And then the article brings up this 2006 study. It was done by some physicists, and they looked at the brushstrokes in several of Van Gogh's paintings, including Starry Night. And, well, what they found is pretty surprising.
Yeah, so they analyzed the statistical properties of the brushstrokes, like how they were distributed and kind of the patterns they created. And what they found was that these patterns actually matched the statistical properties of real-life fluid turbulence.
Fluid turbulence?
Yeah, exactly. So think about like the way water flows in a river or the way air moves in the atmosphere. It's not all smooth and predictable, right? There's all this chaotic movement, these eddies and swirls. And there's actually a whole mathematical framework for understanding turbulence. These things called Kolmogorov scaling laws.
Kolmogorov scaling laws.
Okay.
Basically, they describe how energy is transferred in a turbulent system, like how bigger swirls break down into smaller ones and so on. It's pretty complex stuff, but the point is, Van Gogh's brushstrokes somehow captured this same mathematical pattern.
Wait, so you're saying that the way Van Gogh painted the actual physical strokes on the canvas followed the same rules that govern, like, whitewater rapids? That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, right? And the article takes this even further. It suggests that Van Gogh was actually painting patterns that we see everywhere in the universe, not just in fluids. Like, you see similar swirling patterns in storms, in the plasma on the surface of the sun, even in the clouds of gas between stars. It's like he was tapping into some kind of universal visual language of chaos.
Okay, so this is where it gets even more interesting. The article introduces this concept called motion theory. And this isn't exactly something you'd find in a physics textbook, right? No, not really. It's more of a different way of looking at reality as presented in this article. The core idea is that everything in the universe is basically structured motion. From the tiniest particles to the largest galaxies, it's all about things moving in specific organized ways. But it's important to note, this motion theory is not like a widely accepted scientific theory, okay? It's just a lens that the authors are using to interpret these connections.
All right, so if everything is motion, how does that explain Van Gogh's swirls and those Kolmogorov laws we were just talking about?
Well, motion theory has this main principle. It says that motion, when it's constrained, tends to synchronize. So imagine you have a system where things are moving around, but there are also like boundaries or rules limiting that movement. In those situations, you start to see patterns emerging as things interact and influence each other. And the article says that's exactly what we're seeing in Van Gogh's skies. It's like those swirling patterns represent all these loops of motion interacting and syncing up across different scales.
And that's where they make that really bold statement, right? They say that Van Gogh actually painted the motion field.
Exactly. It's like he somehow captured the fundamental essence of how motion works in the universe. But, there's another layer to this, and that's Van Gogh's mental state. The article talks about how he was struggling with, mental illness, isolation, all this turmoil in his life when he painted Starry Night.
Yeah, there's a lot of, personal chaos going on there. How does that connect to this idea of capturing cosmic motion?
Well, the article suggests that for Van Gogh, painting wasn't just about expressing himself artistically. It was also a way for him to find some sense of order, some kind of rhythmic alignment. Like every brushstroke was a tiny adjustment, a way to bring a little bit of harmony to his internal chaos, almost like he was syncing up his own internal motion structure with the universe's motion flow.
So like art is therapy, but on a cosmic scale.
Kind of, yeah. They even say that painting Starry Night might have been an act of survival for Van Gogh. Like, by visually representing this underlying motion of the universe, his brain was able to find some sort of resonance, some connection that helped him cope with everything he was going through.
That's a really interesting perspective. And then the article goes on to point out all these examples of swirling patterns that we see in the universe, right? Not just in galaxies, but in things like solar storms or even just water going down a drain.
Exactly. They're saying that this swirling motion, this nested vortex behavior, it's not just a coincidence. It's a fundamental way that energy organizes itself at all levels. And maybe Van Gogh was able to perceive this underlying reality because his perception was heightened in some way, due to his mental state.
Okay, so if motion theory sees these universal motion patterns, how does that differ from how, regular science explains things like turbulence or swirling gas?
Well, it's all about perspective. Where science might use the term turbulence to describe the chaotic flow of fluids, motion theory sees recursive synchronization breakdowns in motion gradients. Instead of swirling gas in a nebula, they see nested convergent spirals within localized motion systems. It's like they're looking for the underlying principles of motion that drive these phenomena.
But they're not saying that the scientific explanations are wrong, are they?
No, not necessarily. They actually point out that the math used to describe turbulence, like the Kolmogorov energy cascade, it aligns with what we see in Van Gogh's swirls. It's more about interpretation, about the bigger picture. Science provides the vocabulary and the grammar, but motion theory tries to explain the language itself, the underlying structure.
And the article also says that we might not be able to perceive this motion all the time, right?
Yeah, they suggest that it's not that the universe is hiding it from us. It's more like we've just stopped paying attention. We've gotten so used to seeing things in a certain way that we miss this underlying dynamism that's always there.
But they also say that, deep down, we're built to recognize this motion.
Exactly. They argue that it's part of our, innate human perception. They say Van Gogh wasn't hallucinating. He was just seeing something that's always there, but that we usually filter out. And they connect this to the motion that forms everything in the universe, the atoms, the stars, even our own emotions, everything syncs to motion, they say.
So that brings us back to Starry Night. Maybe that's why it's such a powerful image. It's not just because it's pretty or because we connect with Van Gogh's emotions. It's like it's tapping into something deeper, something that resonates with us on a fundamental level.
That's what the article argues, yeah. They say that the painting resonates with us because it reflects this truth about the universe, a truth that our subconscious might already know. It's like we're drawn into the painting because we're made of the same stuff, that same swirling motion.
Yeah, it's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
Yeah.
And the article points out that Van Gogh, he didn't have any of the scientific tools or knowledge that we have today. Mm-hmm. He just figured this out by, looking inward.
Yeah, they emphasize that point. He didn't have telescopes or equations or any of that. He just connected with his own experience of motion and then translated that onto the canvas. It's pretty incredible.
So to sum it all up, the article is basically saying that Starry Night, it might be more than just a painting. It could be an accidental but incredibly profound depiction of the universe's fundamental structure.
That's the main takeaway, yeah. And they end with this challenge to the reader. They say, the next time you see Starry Night, don't just look at it, really see it. Try to perceive the structure, the motion, the swirling energy that they believe is the very essence of the universe. And they suggest that maybe, sometimes, art can reveal things to us that even science hasn't fully grasped yet.
That's a pretty powerful thought. So for everyone listening, maybe after this, you'll start seeing things a little differently. Look for those swirls, those patterns of motion in your own life and in the world around you. You might be surprised by what you discover.